Here's how I was able to generate over £100,000 of pipeline in just 1 week and close that with upfront payment. Hi everyone, my name's Arun and I have over a decade of experience in building full stack and AI-based applications. And today I'll be showing you how to completely automate your sales quotation process. I've worked on thousands of different development projects, and by far the most manual part of this process is bidding or quoting for a job. So I built an AI-powered automation to completely supercharge this process for me, allowing me to build up hundreds of thousands of pounds of pipeline so that I can focus on what really matters, closing those deals, building relationships, and working with my team to get the work done. And that exact process is what I'm going to walk you through today. And you'll be able to download completely for free from my Gumroad page. So this is the automation in its entirety. And to give you a quick overview, we'll be using NAN as the orchestration layer, as you can see here. We'll be using OpenAI as the brain to extract meaningful information from the whole process. We'll be using Google Drive as the central system for all of the files and documents that we'll be creating. On top of that, also the CRM. And we'll be using Clickup to manage the sprints that we generate off the back of it as well. So before we dive into this, I'm not going to be building this live for you. I'm going to be walking you through the entire process. So let's have a look at that process to start off with. So first of all, we need to load the configuration. This is essentially just loading some variables and loading some configuration from a common place. So if you've seen some of my other videos, that's usually a Google Sheet. Then what we're doing is we're loading a statement of work. So this automation is triggered and is based off of the generation and the creation of a statement of work document. Now what I've done initially, which is something that I'll go through on another video, is I've created a Google form that I can give to clients, and when they fill that out, that will generate a statement of work document for me. I'll show you how this works when I go through a live example, but I won't be going through the intricate details of that today. But all you need to know is that the trigger for this automation is the creation of a statement of work document. This outlines who the client is, what the problem that they have, the solution that you're trying to propose to solve that problem, any requirements or technical specifications that they've also outlined. Essentially all the information that I would need if I was doing this myself to generate a quote and a sprint plan. So then this statement of work document then gets passed into an AI model, and this AI model is going to extract and synthesize in some places all the key information that we need. With this key information, we then start to create a directory and folder structure for this client. So we create a client folder, we create a folder for the opportunity, and then we copy a whole bunch of files into that folder. So that includes the original statement of work, it includes a welcome pack for the client, some other useful documents as well if you're doing a lot of projects, so things like change request templates, discovery templates, and an end of day template as well. So basically all the documents that we need to actually onboard this client. So on top of just generating a quote, this automation automates a lot of the onboarding for that client as well, including all these documents and including the sprint planning that I'll go through in a minute. So now we've got our folder structure for this new client. The next thing that we do is we add this client to the CRM. So if this client already exists, then we don't need to add the client details into the client sheet. But if it's a new client, then we'll add them in there as well. And then after that, we then add a new row for this new opportunity that this client has come to us with. And I'll go through some of the details around the opportunity that we're actually capturing. After this, as you can see from this node, we're actually calling a separate workflow, which once again, I'll reference, but I won't be going through in detail today. I'll cover that in another video. This workflow generates the quotation document. So we take all the information that we've extracted. We've obviously gone through the process of setting up the folder structure, setting up the client in the CRM and the opportunity. Now we actually need to generate the quote. So we're taking the key information, we're formatting it into a document to our specification, and we're generating that document. And then lastly, we are actually creating sprints as well. So off the back of this quotation document, we can then create a sprint plan for this opportunity, meaning that once this client is paid and once everything is ready to go and they've been onboarded, we can start straight away and we've got an actionable plan, then we can start to execute. So to be honest, if I summarize this entire workflow, I would say that this saves me anywhere between 3 to 10 hours every single time a new client comes in terms of all the documents that are generated, all the manual data entry, and the setting up and planning of the development sprints. Now that we've gone over an overview of the overall system, I'm going to dive into some of the specific nodes and talk you through some of the intricacies of how I actually implemented this. Don't forget, you'll be able to download this entire automation completely for free from my Gumroad page, which will be in the description. So you can download this, you can play around with it, and you can update it for your own business as well. But in order for you to do that, you kind of need to understand a little bit more about what's going on under the hood. So to start off with, I'm going to start with the trigger. Now, the trigger is a Google Drive trigger. So if I open this up, you can see that I've added my credentials for Google Drive. The polling time I have set to every minute. You can obviously change this to whatever your requirements are. And the trigger is changes involving a specific folder. So I've set up my Google Drive in a way where I have a folder where I'm expecting statements of work to be added. And as you can see, this folder is named Statement of Works. And the thing that we're watching for is a file being created. So essentially all this trigger is doing is it's watching this folder in my Google Drive for when a new file has been created. And as you can see from this pinned data here, this is the sort of metadata that we get off the back of it. A whole bunch of information about the actual file that was created. So this really is the core of everything. When a file is created in this folder, then everything gets kicked off from there. Now note that this can actually pick up on more than one new file that's been created as well. So if you were to create 5 statements of work all at the same time, then this automation will run in exactly the same way. So this is why we have this loop. It'll essentially loop over each of the individual documents that it's found in that folder. This loading config, as I've done in some of my other automations, this is really just loading some variables that I'm going to be using throughout the automation. So what I'll do is I'll go to a previous execution and I'm going to copy the data to the editor. And now we can actually see what's come out each of these different nodes. So if I come to the set variables node here, which is after the loading of the config, you can see here, these are all the variables that I need essentially for different nodes within the automation. So within my config variables sheet, I've got my workspace ID, I've got a space ID, folder ID, the template ID for Clickup, and then a whole bunch of other IDs that are essentially just static variables that I can keep reusing. I've also got this flag at the end here, which is called include project management. This is a Boolean flag, and I use this later on when I'm generating the sprint plan and the quote. And I'll explain that a little bit more later. So now moving on to the loading of the statement of work. So everything up until now is triggered based on any new file that's created in the statement of work folder. So we loop over that file, we load the configuration variables, and then we're going to load the statement of work document that this automation has been triggered on. But we need to be very specific about the type of document that has been added to this folder. With this particular automation, it relies upon files that are Google Docs, not .docx files, not PDF files, but Google Doc files. And that's very important, and there's a reason why. So this if node essentially just filters out if the document contains docx. And I could add some more rules in here as well, just to sort of like enforce that it's not PDF or I don't know, text file or whatever. But for now, because I'm in control of this folder, I know that there's only certain types of documents that's going to be added. So if the file is not a docx file, then it continues. And if it's not a docx file, then I'm assuming here that essentially the file is a Google Doc file. Now, in the instance that a docx file does get added to this folder, I've actually created another automation that runs in parallel with this that converts a document from a docx file to a Google Doc file. Once again, I'll go over this in another video, but all of this will be included on the Gumroad page. So then what we do is we load, if the document is indeed a Google Doc, then we load the document, and the reason why we specify that we want to use Google Doc files is because if I open this up, when you load a Google Doc file into NaN, because of the metadata that's associated with a Google Doc file, it automatically has all of the text content within the document formatted for you that you can use. So you don't need to do any OCR, you don't need to do any processing of the document. Within the metadata of the document that you load, it already includes all of the content for that document, which is brilliant. So for this automation, we want to work with Google Doc files. So I've loaded my document. Now I can essentially pass the text from this document into my AI module. Now for this AI module, we're using OpenAI and we're using GPT-5. And I'm not going to go through all of the best practices around how you should be prompting your LLMs. I do have another video on that if you want to check that out. But I am going to talk you through this general template that I've been using. So you can see I've got a whole bunch of headers here. I've got a role, context, tasks, so sort of like the step-by-step chain of thought process that the LLM needs to go through when it's actually executing the extraction of the insight. Certain rules as well. So these rules align with the formatting of the data that I'm expecting. So for example, for company location region, I'm expecting values from this list here. For number of employees, I'm expecting this list of values here. And the most important thing is what I actually want the LLM to output. So the LLM takes in the text from the statement of work document, and based on this rule here, I'm telling it that it must output its data into this exact schema. So I'm looking for the LLM to extract company name, the region that the company is located, the country that it's located, the specific address that it's located, the industry of the company, website, number of employees, LinkedIn page, opportunity name, opportunity summary, a risk score, and I'll explain this, the explanation for the risk, and a sprint plan. Now, what works really well with LLMs, as you can see, this format of this JSON schema that I've specified is using a typing structure. So all of these keys have an associated type after the semicolon, and this type basically specifies the data type that I'm expecting as the output for the key. Now, this last one, sprint plan, is referencing a custom type, which is sprint plan typing. And then in the section underneath, this is where I actually specify what that type is. So if you're used to writing TypeScript or anything like that, then you'll know what these sorts of types are. What this does is it gives it a really strict set of rules to actually output the data based upon. So you can see for the sprint plan type, if I come to the sprint plan typing here, this is what I'm expecting for each of the sprints within the sprint plan. So I'm expecting a name for the sprint, the feature, requirements, dependencies, a user story, the number of story points, a definition of done, and the resources that are needed. And then if I look at the resources, this is using another typing called the resource typing. So if I come to resource typing, what I need here is I need a name for the resource, and this can be either a project manager, a developer, or a quality assurance resource, and the number of hours that they're needed for. I then give a little bit more information about the sprint plan typing. So I kind of describe what each of the different fields are here. And I include a note. So if you remember, I referenced a variable earlier, which was include project management. So within my config variables, I included a Boolean flag, which was called include project management. And for this particular example, it was set to false. So this little bit of sort of like JavaScript here essentially says, if include project management is false, then make sure to not include resource estimates for the project manager. Otherwise, continue essentially. So what this basically means is if the flag for include project management is set to true, then include the resource estimates for a project manager. But if it's set to false, then don't include the project manager in any of the estimates. Now, one of the most important parts of this prompt is the examples. This is how you can really take your prompts to the next level, by giving not only ideal examples, but by giving bad examples that it should not follow. In this example, I've just given a good example, and this is essentially an example output following the schema that I outlined above, including all the sorts of data that I would be expecting. So that overall is a quick overview of the prompt. One more thing I want to explain is the risk score and risk explanation. So one of the most painful parts about pricing up a project is when the client gives really unclear or ambiguous requirements. Let's just say that they don't have all the information. They very vaguely refer to systems that it needs to be connected to, and the knowledge about access is really thin. So what this risk score indicates is how complete and how comprehensive is the information that the client has provided in the statement of work. It essentially encompasses, if I was to work on this project, how much of a contingency do I need to set aside in case the requirements change or in case of new information coming across. So during this quotation process, the automation will generate a price for a project, but then it'll also generate a second price that includes this contingency, which essentially gives me a buffer to say, okay, based on these requirements that you've given me, this is the price that I'm going to quote you. And this price includes a contingency. That means that if the requirements change, or if we find out that access to a certain system is more difficult than we thought it was, then we're covered. Because the last thing that you want to do is quote for a project and then be under-resourced or not have enough budget to actually meet the requirements. So you always want to be covering yourself when doing this. And that's what the risk score does. So then the explanation off the back of that is essentially a qualitative explanation of why the AI has given the risk score that it has. Okay, so now jumping back to the LLM, as you can see from this previous run, you can see all the information in its output. You can see that it's generated an entire sprint plan, which is amazing, and everything else that I was looking for. So really, once we've generated the information from the AI node, this really powers everything else. Everything else is really just a case of just organizing this information, putting it into the right folder and directory structure, and then manually entering data into places. So this next part here, I'm not going to go into all the individual nodes because they're very simple, to be honest. But essentially what's happening is we do a check to see whether the client has a folder within our Google Drive. If we've not already worked with this client, then it will create a new folder for the client. Then within that new folder for the client, we then create an opportunity, and that is a folder. And then within that folder, we then copy a whole bunch of templates that I've already prepared. So we copy the statement of work, we copy a welcome pack for the client, we copy a change request template, we copy a discovery template and an end of day template for developers to use to give end of day updates. So now within this client folder, we have the opportunity folder and we have all of these documents to then start onboarding this client as quickly as possible. The reason why this is so powerful is because it just eliminates as much friction as possible when closing and onboarding a client. Once you've got this quote out of the door, you can be confident that as soon as the client signs, you can get started and you've got everything that you need to actually go. So now moving on, then we add this information to the CRM, we add or update the client information within the CRM, and then we add an opportunity using all of the information that we've provided above, and then we generate a quote. So essentially, once again, we're just using the information that's come from the AI model and from the opportunity, and we're generating a document that includes a price for this project. And then finally, within Clickup, and I will show you what this looks like when I test this on a real example, we create a new list within the Clickup workspace. And then what we do is we add a task for each of the sprints within the sprint plan within that client project. So the sprint plan that we generated, we iterate over all of the sprints and we generate a task for each of those sprints within the Clickup project. So that means as soon as this project goes ahead, my project manager can pick up this project and start managing the development team to start working on the sprints. And so that is the overall system. And one final piece, at the end, once it's looped over all of the different documents that have been added to the Google Drive folder, it will then just send me an email saying that it's done and saying that there's new information in the CRM and in the sprint plans. So let's run this on a real example. Now, as I said, there are aspects to this automation that I've not gone into details on, including the Google form, including the quotation process, so the generation of a quote, and also including the conversion of a docx file to a Google Doc. But you will get all of these automations on the Gumroad page, and I will go through these in another video. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you exactly how this generates a quotation document from somebody filling out the Google form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the executions tab here, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment once I've kicked off the process by filling out the form and everything else has occurred. So this is the Google form that I've created, and what I need to do is I need to go to the responder link. So this is the Google form that a client will see. It is comprehensive. There are around 20 questions or so, and it's purposely comprehensive because the more information that we're able to get, the better it's going to be and the more accurately the AI will be able to quote for this project. Now what I've done just to speed things up is I have created some example answers to all of these. So I'm just going to copy and paste these in. Okay, so I filled out all the questions. As I said, this questionnaire is intended to be comprehensive, and I've put together these questions based on years of experience of pricing up these projects. So I've crafted these questions in a way where it should be able to extract all the information that I would need if I was pricing this up myself. So now I'll submit this, and the response has been recorded. So what this will do is now kick off the entire process, and I'll show you what this looks like when it's done, including all of the outputs. Okay, so now the execution has finished. As you can see from this execution log, everything succeeded, so this is perfect. Now I'm going to show you the outputs. So off the back of this, if I come into Google Drive, you can see that a folder has been created within this clients folder that I have. Within this folder, named after the client, we've got the opportunity folder. So this one is AI Regulatory Document Intelligence Platform. If I click into there, I've now got all the onboarding documents, so the welcome pack, discovery template, change request template, end of day report. I've got the original state of work document that was generated. So this state of work document was generated based on the Google form that I filled out. So I can open this up and I can show you what this looks like. You can see it formats everything in a really nice, clear, readable format, which is great. And most importantly, the quote. So if I open up the quote, once again, formatted really nicely, really clear, really simple. Puts it into a table as well in terms of all the different sprints and the resources that are needed for each of the sprints. Breaks the project down into the number of hours, hourly rates, for example, and obviously you can change these as you want, and the overall cost for the project. So we've got the cost for each of the different resources, you've got the risk factor, and you've got an explanation for the risk factor as well, why this risk factor was given 37%. And then finally, you've got the costs. So you've got the costs excluding the risk factor, including the contingency for the risk factor, and then any other sort of like commission that you need to add as well. So this is everything that you need to basically send off a quote to a company, which is perfect. All completely automated and done in literally just a couple of minutes. The other thing is the sprint plan in Clickup. So the sprint plan in the table here perfectly aligns with the sprint plan in the Clickup page as well. So if we have a look at this, sprint number 1, discovery and scoping. If we add up the number of hours, that's 16 plus 6, that's 22. If I come over to Clickup, you can see sprint number 1 called Discovery and Scoping. And if I just select it, you can see the time estimate is 22 hours. And as you can see, there is tasks allocated for each of the individual sprints here as well, which is perfect. So now you have the exact system that I use to generate hundreds of thousands of pounds of pipeline on a weekly basis. And you can access it completely for free by downloading it on the Gumroad page. Or follow along with this video and build it for yourself. If this video helped you, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe, and even leave a comment down below with how you're going to use this. But for now, I'll see you soon.